Hi there, I'm Rayleigh Bacon, and welcome to the Electroculture Foundation series, where we explore the unseen forces behind growth. Magnetism, light, atmospheric charge, the hidden harmonics of our living Earth. And of course, the rebels, the researchers, the mystics, and the forgotten science. Today's episode is not just about farmers and electroculture antennas. We're going to look at the technologies at scale, those technologies that go beyond the spiral antenna. We're going to go deep into the grandfather of electroculture, Justin Christofleau, and the foundational work that he provided to this growing movement. In the early 20s, he had reached a peak where he was selling upwards of 150,000 units of his antennas. And then it went silent. If electroculture works, why aren't farmers using it? It's a common question that I often get asked, and maybe you have seen the spirals. You've seen the antennas, those copper wires spiraling up a bamboo stake. You've seen the Instagrammers, the YouTubers, and the TikTokers make outrageous claims. Everything from changing the weather to deterring predation and mitigating chemtrails. What is truth and what is fiction? Because here's the thing, while those influencers are rushing to be the first one to sell you a wire jig or an AI-generated ebook that reads like rubbish, there are farmers who are quietly tinkering, experimenting, and refining their results with electroculture. So today's episode, we're going to look at and dissect a few TikTok influencers touching on weather claims, endless recycled myths that just keep going one after the other. You might laugh, you might even start to cringe inside, but you'll come out cleaner on what this movement actually is and what it isn't. So let's begin. We'll circle back to my original question, which was, if electroculture works, why aren't more farmers using it? Here's the real answer. Because most of what's being sold as electroculture online cannot scale. Not in its current form. Not the way TikTok is packaging it. Those copper spirals everyone's chasing, they're not the breakthrough. They're the gateway. They're the surface level tech. The problem isn't electroculture. It's the narrative. It's the way it's been communicated. Farmers are deeply pragmatic and practical people. The real question isn't really whether it works, it's how can it grow and reach more people? We've often asked that same question about other movements within agriculture, farming, gardening, etc. Organic as a movement has been around easily 70 years. And after decades of books, documentaries, subsidies, and TED Talks, still less than 1% of Canadian and American farmers are actually growing organically. 99% are still doing so conventionally using chemicals, pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, etc. So the question for those farmers, does electroculture work? They're still wondering whether organic farming practices. And what about regenerative farming, silvopasture, permaculture? There are many tools in our toolkits that we can use that do indeed provide benefit, but farmers are not adapting and adopting a lot of these techniques because most farmers are operating on razor-thin margins. They are one drought or one crop failure away from bankruptcy. They don't have surplus time or capital to take uncalculated risks. This is the reality. And even regenerative agriculture, which is now highly backed by a lot of science, by a lot of documentation, a lot of farmers who have been teaching and growing the movement as a whole, is still hitting walls. Labor costs, market barriers, policy frictions, everything that sounds promising in a conference hall turns out brutally complex in the field. I know because I was a farmer for over 10 years. So when I hear the question, does electroculture work for farmers? The real answer is electroculture isn't a miracle. It's not even a scam as many people claim it to be. It's a tool, a serious tool. There are a lot of tools in the electroculture umbrella, easily over 30 different techniques that can be utilized in different contexts, many of which could change yields, productivity, disease resistance, even nutritional value of food, all of which is very important for farmers. But the difficulty is conveying the message, the movement. If you understand when, where, and how to use electroculture, then it can begin to work. But as a farmer, I didn't know that. And I didn't go looking for electroculture. It found me at the exact moment my world was falling apart. Let me take you back in time. The following is an insert from my book, presently titled Electroculture Foundations. Back then, I was running a commercial farm, full-time, flat out, microgreens, edible flowers, baby salad greens, all on tight production timelines. We were supplying over 30 restaurants, plus a network of distributors. Orders flew in, turnaround was brutal. Every hour counted. From the outside, it looked like a well-oiled machine. Trays sprouting like clockwork, data sheets, germination schedules, irrigation down to the minute. Success, at least on paper. But I was running on fumes. Most mornings started before sunrise. Cold hands in damp soil, inventory lists running through my mind as I seated trays, one arm hauling soil mixes, the other carrying harvest bags. Meanwhile, Chiara was fielding client messages, my wife, and wrangling up all of the bureaucracy. We lived in constant sympathetic overdrive. Our nervous systems were fried. Our bodies were beginning to unravel. I loved the land. I loved growing food, but I'd lost the rhythm, the meaning, the alignment that first called me here. Maybe you know that feeling too, when the thing you love begins to wear you down and you don't know how to return to the spark that started it all. Then Andrea Donnelly showed up, out of nowhere, one summer afternoon, full suit and tie. He stepped out of his tidy sedan and popped the trunk, like he was unveiling a secret. So you see, Andrea used to work for Oracle, part of a software infrastructure behind Europe's 5G rollout and many other technologies. A sharp, high-level sales guy who'd clearly walked away from something. He was looking for something else, something that made sense. After we got talking, he said to me, "I've been experimenting with energy." A little cryptic, like he wasn't sure how to explain it quite yet. In the trunk, I glanced over his shoulder. There were strange contraptions. It was well organized with a mix of hand-built devices, spirals of enameled aluminum wire with various colors, red, violet, and a deep blue. It was like a cross between a science kit and something out of sacred geometry. These help plants grow, you know. Have you ever heard of electroculture? I mean, he did say this to me all in Italian, but I translate. I hadn't. Maybe a blog post once, but something in his voice caught me, and something in me began to lean in. He gifted me a few devices, just like that. We chatted for a bit, and a week later, I ran my first experiment. 24 identical plastic pots, same soil, same seeds, cannabis sativa, for consistency, of course, same light, same water. I placed them in my greenhouse, but first I made one change. 12 of the pots had a hand-coiled spiral antenna, enameled aluminum wire, simply pushed into the soil, with the coil rising out the top. The other 12 left untouched as controls. I brought those plants outside for a night. I was mapping solar storms using an app on my phone to see when the sun was sending out a wall of plasma charged particles bouncing off our magnetosphere, changing our Schumann resonance, changing the atmospheric energy potential and the electrical gradients, which I would later discover was important for making this technology function. I took the wire and pierced it down through each of the 12 pots so that those pots were not only grounded with the earth, but they had the aerial portion of the antenna pointing upwards. I left them overnight, just one night during that solar storm. Afterwards, that following morning, I brought them inside my greenhouse. I laid them next to my other pots that had the exact same parameters except the spirals. And then I removed the coils. 3 days in, it was obvious. The electroculture pots had begun to sprout. Uniform, strong, 3 days earlier than the others. I was amazed. It was obvious that something unseen was having an effect. By week 2, the gap had widened even more. Those began to have thicker stems, darker leaves, about 20% more growth. I documented it all. It wasn't subtle, it was undeniable. But the real surprise came later. I left all 24 pots side by side to continue observing. Then one damp morning, I walked inside my greenhouse and something was off. Humidity had spiked overnight. That's snail weather. And sure enough, I spotted one, a fat, silver, plump snail mid-feast on a young leaf. It had only touched the control group. I checked again. Every antenna-charged plant was untouched, not one bite. The snail had moved pot to pot through the untreated seedlings, ignoring the others completely. At first, I was annoyed. Cannabis seeds are indeed very expensive. I tossed the snail quickly out and began to sulk for a moment in the corner. Once I began to wake up and rub my face a bit and stop my whining, I started asking questions. How did the snail know which plants to eat? What was it sensing? The texture? The taste? The frequency? And more importantly, what had I just stumbled into? In that moment, electroculture for me stopped being an experiment. It became a gateway, a riddle, a forgotten technology hiding in plain sight. I didn't have answers, but I had something even better. Questions. Big, beautiful, burning questions that reignited something inside my very soul. You see, I wasn't just exhausted as a farmer. My spark was put out, snuffed. I was running on autopilot, frustrated at times, tired, to say the least. What I had observed was amazing. It seemed that everything I thought I knew about plants was starting to break down. I'd found myself at the edge of a much older conversation, one the Earth had been trying to have with us for a very long time. And the first time in years, I was finally ready to listen. So I repeat the question earlier. If electroculture works, why aren't farmers using it? Before we get into that, we have to look more into what electroculture actually is. What I saw that day, it changed everything for me. Not just the sprouting seeds, not even the snail, though that encounter still hangs in my mind like a riddle. It was something quieter, a feeling like I'd turned into a frequency I hadn't noticed before. I'd spent years talking at nature, and for the first time I was starting to listen, not to spreadsheets, not to yield reports, not to straight lines in rows, but to the plants themselves. There was a rhythm here, a pulse I'd missed entirely in my rush for more productivity. Something alive, responsive, intelligent. So I did what many of you may have already done. I typed electroculture, and what came up was a strange and fascinating array of different claims. Copper spirals wrapped around wooden stakes, pyramids tucked into garden beds, antennas in pots like tuning forks. Some of it looked like art, some like science fiction, and some of it felt strangely familiar. One name kept showing up: David Wexler. David had been experimenting with electroculture for decades, quietly, humbly, with a kind of curiosity I recognized immediately. He wasn't chasing for fame. That was obvious. When I reached out, immediately a friendship began to spark. David walked beside me as I stepped deeper into this forgotten world. He was quick to answer questions. We shared notes, discussions, theories, ideas. About 18 months had passed with audio messages almost on a daily occurrence. A deep friendship had formed, and very quickly I joined him with the Electroculture Beginners to Advanced Facebook community online. This is well before the group began to grow. A few thousand members, humbly, quietly. Very quickly, people began to show up. Gardeners, farmers, engineers, artists, backyard tinkerers, and commercial growers alike. The energy was magnetic. A movement was beginning to take shape. But with growth came complexity. For beginners, it quickly became overwhelming. Scientific insights mixed with mysticism. Simple experiments got lost in esoteric claims. The signal began to blur. That's when I knew I had to write, not to water down the movement, but to make it accessible, to build a bridge between the spirit and the science. So let's start with the simplest question. What is electroculture? At its core, electroculture is the practice of working with the Earth's natural electrical and magnetic fields to support plant growth. That's it. No buzz, no gimmicks, no Frankenstein plants. Just the understanding that the Earth is alive with energy, and that plants, being the brilliant biological antennas that they are, know exactly how to respond. There are two main types of electroculture systems. Passive systems. These use no external power source. They include copper spirals, pyramid structures, atmospheric antennas, and magnetized water setups. They tap into ambient energy like telluric currents from the Earth or subtle frequencies in the air and redistribute them through the growing space, quiet, still, and remarkably effective. Active, or sometimes by some called dynamic systems, they introduce low voltage, sometimes even high voltage, electric currents into the soil or above the plants, often using solar panels or batteries, sometimes even direct current from a power source. Done correctly, they can mimic the beneficial pulses found in nature, like those released during lightning storms, volcanic eruptions, and the like, stimulating seed germination, nutrient uptake, and root development. But here's the heart of it. Electroculture isn't about adding something, it's about tuning into what's already there. You don't need to believe in it, you just need to observe. Because the moment you start listening differently, the garden starts to speak. The soil, the seeds, the sky, it's all alive and part of a rhythm that we've forgotten. Agriculture offers more than tools. It offers a shift in perception, a chance to grow with the earth, not on top of it. And that's why it matters now more than ever, because gardening and farming isn't just about growing food, it's about remembering what we are and what we're not. We are stewards. We're a continuation of the earth itself. And in the chapters ahead, we'll walk this path together, one step at a time, spiral by spiral, root to crown, observation over belief, curiosity over certainty. And I want to remind you that your garden or your farm, the very earth around you, it remembers these secrets. And if you're reading this or listening, maybe, just maybe, you're starting to remember too. So that was a segment from my Electroculture Foundation's book. Each one of the Electroculture Foundation series episodes of this podcast will cover some segments or even chapters from the book, and then we'll go into greater depth and maybe even some asides that are relevant to the topics at hand, giving you a deep dive into the world of electroculture. So if you're interested in that, make sure that you search Electroculture Foundations anywhere you listen to podcasts and add that RSS feed to your favorite platform, or subscribe, follow, whatever you need to do to make that happen. So let's circle back now. We're going to go back to our original question about farmers. There is a dilemma here. I really want to get something straight, that farmers are not closed-minded individuals. Some are. Yeah, some are. They're cautious, however, and for a good reason. In farming, being wrong isn't theoretical. It's personal, financial, physical. Farmers statistically have the highest divorce rates of any industry. While I'm still happily married, I know that statistic has merit. It's been a lot of work when I was farming to make sure that my most important relationships didn't suffer. Farming is difficult. It's the difference between covering payroll or losing the land, and what most of the hype online completely misses. It annoys me when I see people with questions like that. Why aren't farmers adapting it? Well, obviously, the people who are posing the questions have never farmed in their life and probably don't know anybody who does. If you're a serious grower managing dozens or hundreds of acres or even a high-output urban farm, then you already know every decision has to pass a brutal test. Does this make me more resilient or more vulnerable? You don't get to play with unproven tools when you're one drought, one failed crop, or one broken tractor away from disaster. And that's not fear, that's wisdom. That's earned skepticism. Just like with regenerative ag, permaculture, or even basic organic amendments, the issue isn't that techniques don't work, it's that the systems don't support them. Time, capital, labor, market access, proof. If even one of those is missing, you can't afford to chase the newest trend, no matter how promising it looks. And it really makes me start to think about some of the influencers online that really just hype and spin electroculture. And why I said earlier it does it a disservice, because as a farmer, I know very well that there are no shortcuts to growing high-quality food. Any real grower knows that there are only trade-offs. When a farmer sees a video claiming a single copper spiral can clear chemtrails or control the weather, they shut it off. That's not science, that's spectacle. And it does real damage. It undermines the real documented work being done by serious practitioners, like Justin Christofleau, who we will cover momentarily. Those field-tested methods that he had uncovered have been refined and replicated across tens of thousands of successful applications. And we'll get to that. Because what's needed now isn't more content, it's context. And context doesn't mean lowering the bar, it means raising the standard, so real growers can make real decisions. A grounded framework that shows where electroculture fits. And that's where the movement, in my opinion, needs to go. Hey there, Rayleigh Bacon here. Just a quick moment. If you're enjoying this episode of the Electroculture Foundation series, I have a small favor to ask. Head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening and leave us a review. It really helps more people discover the show. It only takes a couple of minutes and it truly means the world to us. But here's the thing. I get it. For a lot of people, even that can feel like a big ass. I feel like a big ask. So whether your review is good, bad, or neutral, if you take a screenshot and post it in our Facebook group, Electroculture Beginners to Advanced, making sure to tag myself, Rayleigh Bacon, or David Wexler, we'll gift you a 2-month trial subscription to become an Electroculture Foundation Insider. It's our way of saying thank you for supporting this movement. Now let's get back to the show. So within the electroculture community right now, there are a lot of people who are researching, experimenting, doing things quietly. There are many who are coming online, who are wanting to share their research, share their ideas. There are some people who are wanting to be influencers or thought leaders in the movement, but don't have any practical experience. And I think it's really important. As a community, we need to discern fact from fiction. And that's very difficult because the movement itself is still very premature and it's hard to know who to trust. But 2, anytime that someone comes online and says they have all the answers, that say they understand things very clearly and that other people do not, take heed. Okay. I'm one of those people. There are times where I will say, so-and-so did not understand this accurately, but I do want to preface by saying, I don't have all the answers. Okay. There are some areas that I inevitably do not understand well, and in the future, it will prove that I was wrong in various areas. And that is my preface as we segue very carefully into breaking down a few examples that are important to drive this message home, if I may.
So a lot of people are asking, what examples do you have of electroculture showing that it works? And this is what I wanted to show you. This is Justin Christofleau, who is the founder of electroculture. And these are the crops in which he yielded using his techniques, such as copper antennas, all different types of rings to basically.
Okay, so let's break this down right away. So Matt Rosk here, there are 3 things he said here that are inaccurate. And that is a bit of a red flag early on, and I want to just be clear on that. 1, I often, with endearment, I refer to Christofleau as being the grandfather of electroculture. But the truth is, he stood on the back of other giants before him in the early 1700s, and there were other researchers like Legstrom who did experiments with electricity and plant growth as well, and he voyaged to the Arctic and did research, etc. So Christofleau came on much later, and we'll cover that at the end of this session as well in more detail. What he did do that was really important and why he could be called the father of modern electroculture is because he made it easy and practical. He invented a couple devices, among others, that are in his book on electroculture, which I'll put in the show notes and the description below. In that, he shares atmospheric energy collection and caloric energy collection. Now, it's not fair to say that he is the founder of electroculture, however, because he's not. Even before his time, electroculture was being researched in academia in Italy and in France. And then there were roundtables prior to World War II that were bringing electroculture into universities and broader discussions within agronomy as a whole. So he's not the father of electroculture, but he is an early modern pioneer. The other point, which it's really worth emphasizing here, we have to re-listen to this so that it's clear, shows me that he has not read Christofleau's book, or if he has, it's been very surface level.
He yielded using his techniques, such as copper antennas, all different types of rings to basically harness the Earth's energy, orgone, chi, prana, life force, whichever word you want to say it.
Okay, so he says there that Christofleau was using copper antennas and all different types of rings. So you can look in the show notes at the book that's provided. We'll break it down a little more in the extension as well. But the aerial portion explicitly is not made of copper. The collectors that point and protrude upwards are galvanized steel or zinc. So very important distinction. There's reasons for that. It does include copper, and it's getting into the minutia, and we'll cover that, but it's not in the way that Rosk is referring to here. Also, Christofleau did not use any type of rings. We're mistaking people between Georges Lakowski, Slim Sperling, and others who use rings. But Christofleau, however, his patents, from what I have seen, does not include anything like that. The other point that he's making here, and I don't want to get into the weeds on it, but it's important because I need to be clear here. There are two camps within the movement, and I've seen it really exemplified in our community on Facebook and elsewhere. There are those who are into the mysticism and the metaphysics. There are those who are into the sciences, the physics, the electrochemistry, electrophysiology. These two camps, they don't really mesh well. They're the nuts and bolts, and then they're the Tartarians, free energy type. They're kind of clashing, and you might identify as one or the other. So it's really important to be very careful with the use of language that we choose, because Christofleau was not advocating to my knowledge, to be utilizing chi, orgone, prana, anything esoteric. He was working with the exchange between the atmosphere and the earth within the known laws of physics at that time. And in his book, he's very clear as to the mechanisms that he's using to generate current, none of which fit within this camp of metaphysics. However, there are ways that it can be hybridized. There are other modern antennas that can integrate techniques from Pierluigi Aguina and others that can give potentially greater benefit by tapping into other forms of energy that are more subtle. But we need to be very, very careful. So let me just make that clear. Is it clear? Good. Let's move on. Okay, so before we go into the work of Christofleau, I have one more point that I want to make here. Another video. This one has been making the rounds and it's getting viral. I'm also seeing in our community in Facebook, there's a lot of posts related to being able to modify the weather. And this is worthy of some investigation. Let's take a look at this.
No. So this is called electroculture. And look at this. So there's trails all over, but right above us, even look at that. You can see that trail and then boom, it dissipates. Same thing with this one. It comes right over and it goes away. There's something going on, my friends, right above.
So now I'm going to offend some people inevitably in the community, and for that, I'm sorry. So I'm going to offend everybody, actually. I might as well let the gloves off, so to speak. It's my opinion that chemtrails do exist in the context of geoengineering, and that there are indeed governments, including the United States, and the UK, who are doing active research for military purposes, for weather modification purposes, the use of cloud seeding, aerosol spraying, etc. Geoengineering.org is a great resource for that and documents some of the heavy metals that have been contaminated in various remote areas. However, is electroculture as we see it with antenna culture, which is essentially what he had there was a improperly oriented Aguina spiral. Pierluigi Aguina, who we cover in the Foundation series in upcoming sessions, he was very specific with his antennas, with the orientation as well and the function that it provided. Now, Aguina, he was a madman, a mystic, also contemporary of Marconi. So he understood physics as well as the metaphysics. So a very interesting character. He did indeed invent a device that was able to change weather phenomena. He could induce rain. It's well documented. It's in newspapers and journals and television in Italy. Agena was certainly able to do this, and he had a precedent for that. And there's a good story behind that. There are other individuals, Constable, who was able to influence from what his perspective was is the ether and be able to change precipitation patterns. Just as there are researchers using modifications of standing stones or menhirs, power towers, that are placed on very specific locale. And this goes into more of the metaphysics. This is getting into concepts like scalar energy, geobiology, and other forces we won't cover here. But what I'm trying to say is it is possible with certain technologies that could fit within the electroculture umbrella to be able to influence the changes in ionization and the way that protons flow in the atmosphere, minimizing hail, potentially inducing rain, maybe clearing atmospheric pollution, if indeed what he's referencing there is chemtrails, perhaps. But that is really into the fringes. It's not what atmospheric antennas are designed to do, from my perspective. And once more, I'm telling you the same thing I said at the beginning, which is I don't have all the answers. But I can tell you that anything that I have seen in my research and documentation is that you need something a little bit more advanced than what he is sharing.
This is the only place in the sky where the chemtrails have been dissipated. Now, I was told that was going to happen. So there's something going on, and I'm darn excited about it. Time to grow food, my friends.
Free man. Yeah, I definitely agree with the free man movement. But his little mini Mickey Mouse coil, not to offend everybody, we all have to start somewhere. And, I've got my own, it's all tangled up. I've got my own Mickey Mouse coil, which is caught on a cord. We all have to start somewhere, and these type of coils are fun. It's a first vantage point. You stick it in a pot and you see results. But I can tell you very, very confidently that his copper wire coiled around this piece of wood that's planted into one of his potted trees that isn't even in contact with the earth in a dried out environment with no water moisture whatsoever is not going to create some kind of metaphysical exchange between the atmosphere and the earth. Because even the people who claim very clearly how to achieve that, even the work of Wilhelm Reich and others, it's a lot more complicated than just a stick and some wire. And it's something I highly advise people not to get into, because we're playing God when we start to dabble in weather modification, and it makes us no better than anybody who is spraying compounds in the air thinking they're virtuous. So I digress. Before Photoshop, before AI, 150,000 atmospheric collectors transformed farms from Europe to China, Australia, Canada, and beyond. Who built these? Why did they vanish? And why does almost no one know the name Justin Christofleau? This is not a fringe theory. This is a documented history. I'm going to be very careful here as we go through his work, his patents, buried under decades of silence. After the First World War and the Spanish flu, food shortages devastated populations. Entire regions of France were hungry, fields were ruined, farmers needed a miracle. They got one. But not from a government agency, not from a multinational corporation, but from a single inventor, Justin Christofleau, engineer, baker's son, visionary, and the unacknowledged godfather of electroculture. Born in 1865, Christofleau held dozens of patents in aviation, magnetism, thermal engineering, and what we know him best for, agricultural innovations. His bread kneading machines revolutionized French bakeries. His early magnetic motors predated modern battery science. Then he turned to farming. His goal? Grow abundant, high-energy food without chemicals, without fertilizers, without waste. He didn't even use manure. He believed nature already had all the energy we needed. We just had to learn how to harness it. And I do believe, as I siphon through his work and start to dissect his prototypes, his inventions, his anecdotes and testimonials, I think he achieved that goal. Through tall atmospheric collectors oriented with the probe facing southward, through copper and zinc stacks that captured solar and as well as magnetic currents, through underground wires buried in precise patterns with the Earth's magnetic field, Christofleau built a system that used the Earth's energy to transform crops. The results? As he says in his book, astounding. Wheat fields that doubled in yield, tomatoes the size of large golf balls, cabbages with a 3.35 centimeter circumference, with a 3-meter, 30 centimeter circumference. Trees that hadn't borne fruit in years suddenly bursting at harvest time. And this wasn't just his achievements. Thousands of people shared the results, many of which were notarized, photographed, and witnessed, signed and documented. Patents filed in France, book published from Spain to Italy to Australia, devices sold worldwide. This wasn't just a theory, it was a reality. But then it disappeared. Why? Why would a method that worked, that farmers swore by, that governments like Mussolini's Italy promoted, why would that vanish from textbooks, disappear from universities, and be left out of modern agricultural history altogether? Was it too effective? Too independent from chemical inputs? Too radical for the emerging agro-industrial complex? This isn't just a story about an inventor, it's a story about the gatekeeping of knowledge, about forgotten futures, and the fight that we are presently doing to reclaim them. You're part of this. In this Foundation Series extension, we go deeper than ever into the life and work of Justin Christofleau, his machines, his theories, his trials, his exile from mainstream science, and the growing modern rediscovery of electroculture around the world. This is the history they didn't teach you, the technology they said couldn't exist, and the future we may need to return to if we want to grow food without poisoning ourselves and the soil. It all starts here. Welcome to the extension. Let's begin. To get access to that and unlock the full Electroculture Foundation series, check out the link in the show notes or description. It's less than $5 a month with full-length episodes. Well, I say every Wednesday, but this week we came out Friday. It's taken a lot more work than I thought. Become an early pioneer of a growing movement and help support this movement, Electroculture and beyond. That's a wrap on this free edition of the Foundation series. If you're a Foundation insider, stick around. There's more coming up after the break. And for everyone else, we'll catch you next week.